You know, if there's one question I get asked more than any other, more even than if 4 out of 5 people suffer from diarrhea, does the 5th person actually enjoy it? That question would have to be, Mark, can you make do with Micro Four Thirds combined with this Panasonic Leica DG Summilux 25mm f1.4 ASPH as your main camera in 2025? Or are you just spitting into the wind of the inevitable decline of a deprecated system? Well, today we're going to try and answer that question. This video is titled Micro Four Thirds is all you need because that has been my mantra lately. There's a reason why they call gear acquisition syndrome gas, and my desire to buy new technology inevitably results in an explosion of sulfurous self-justification and tainted logic. But you see, I need a new camera. And yes, I know I don't actually, but climb aboard this conceit with me as I tried to persuade myself or disabuse myself of the notion completely. Now, I'm sure that I'm not the only Micro Four Thirds user out there bemoaning the lack of new cameras for the system. Yes, you can still get chunky video-centric offerings from Panasonic and even chunkier wildlife-focused offerings from OM System. But where are the compact, high-quality, do-everything interchangeable cameras that established Micro Four Thirds in the first place? Now, taking an existing camera that hasn't had a proper upgrade for practically a decade and chucking USB-C in there does not constitute a new camera. And yes, I'm looking at you, OM5 Mark II. The fact is, compact cameras are cool. They always were, but now there's a new generation that realizes that they can get better quality out of a real camera than their phone and have a blast while doing it, all the time matching the colorful leatherette of their photographic jewelry with their Louis Vuitton handbags. Now, I don't need an Yves Saint Laurent camera, but I do need something to replace this beautiful but aging Micro Four Thirds camera, my Olympus Pen F, which still screams fashion accessory, let's face it. But in 2016, this was the pinnacle of Micro Four Thirds. It was a beautiful flagship camera, and really it had the performance to match what was a pretty high price. And I want a new one. One with better image quality, faster autofocus, and the same compact form factor. And you know what? I have found it. The problem is, it's a Fuji. The Fujifilm X-E5 is small but packs an APS-C 40-megapixel sensor and all of those juicy film simulations that Fuji's famous for. I mean, I could go out and buy one tomorrow and the problem would be solved, right? Well, what about those lenses? The camera is small, but the lenses are big, so you lose all of the gains of the small body, and you still have a bunch of legacy glass that you have to get rid of, because the smaller image circle of the Micro Four Thirds means you cannot adapt them to Fuji X. You can see my totally self-constructed first world conundrum here. Now, there is one potential dim flicker at the end of the Micro Four Thirds rabbit tunnel. While I don't expect a Pen F2 or a new Lumix GX camera in the short term, OM do provide an option in the form of a stripped-down version of their OM1. All of the 2025 goodness that they neglected to put into their OM5 Mark II can be found in their OM3. And look, it's big, but maybe not so big once you factor in the small lenses. It's also still only 20 megapixels compared to the 40 of the Fuji, and then look at that price. The Fuji is cheaper, and while you definitely get some computational smarts in the OM3 that are lacking in the X-E5, it's still a hard ask to swallow that, even if the weather sealing of the OM3 means that after you've swallowed it, it'll come out of the other side totally unblemished and ready to shoot. Anyway, it was clear that I had to give my future with the Micro Four Thirds system some thought, and perhaps the best way, rather than actually sit here and whine about it, was to actually see what I could get out of my existing system in 2025. To that end, I was visiting Malaysia and Singapore and decided to bring my Panasonic 25mm f1.4 lens. I mean, if ever there was a de facto standard prime for Micro Four Thirds, it would have to be that or the Olympus 25mm f1.8. Yes, there's an f1.2 Pro version there as well, but it totally defeats the whole compact setup aesthetic. And besides, I don't have it anyway, and the purpose is to see if I can make do with what I do have for now. And you know what? I've realized that other than 1/3 thorough review of the Pen F, where I did compare it to my BMW Mini Cooper and realised that they are both the definition of fun, I tend to talk quite tangentially about the Micro Four Thirds system. It's just there, and yet it's my most used system, particularly when I travel. So let's see what the Micro Four Thirds system can still deliver in 2025 on an innocuous evening in Petaling Jaya as I checked out a local evening market. That's not Venus, it's Planck. Okay, so if there's one thing that needs to be replaced, it's my GoPro. I'd forgotten how bad it performs in low light with image stabilization turned on. But if you can get over the video quality, I do think that both the power and the pitfalls of Micro Four Thirds are on display here. Firstly, it's small. Most of my photography means wandering the streets like a photographic hobo, and the small size and innocuous presence of Micro Four Thirds means you're not going to end up with a sore back or sore nose after someone punches you in it for shoving your camera in their face. Not to say I didn't get a few quizzical and even uncomfortable looks, but I'm used to that, and that's with people I know well. Let's take a look at the Panasonic Leica DG Summilux 25mm f1.4 ASPH. It's not actually that small as a Micro Four Thirds lens. I've heard some people refer to it as pancake, but if this is what constitutes as pancake, then what you've got here is a whole pile of them dripping with maple syrup and ready to give you a coronary. Honestly, it's more of a scone, kind of dry and boring as per the 50mm mantra, but with a bit of cream and strawberry jam to add a bit of that Wimbledon summer atmosphere. Not that you'd probably use it for sports or use it outdoors, particularly on an English summer. This is the first version of the lens and it definitely shows its age with no real weather sealing. The Mark II version supposedly brings a bit of that wet weather protection as well as faster focus motors. Honestly, it seems fast enough for me, but I'm matching it with cameras of the same era. Will it keep up with a new camera? Maybe not, but it's certainly faster than my other main prime lens, the 20mm f1.7. That was my everyday carry when I first got into Micro Four Thirds, but that was with the Panasonic GF1 that's now 16 years old, and that's a slug. So bad that I don't use it for street photography anymore. It may actually be a little sharper than the 25mm, though I haven't tested it, but the larger lens does have a pleasant image quality and a bit more light gathering capacity. But here's a question for you. If you're a Micro Four Thirds shooter, have you noticed the difference between the Panasonic and the Olympus or OM lenses? Having started out in the Lumix world, most of my lenses were Panasonic, and they've benefited from having image stabilization to make up for the poor stabilization on the bodies. In the Olympus OM world, it's all about the IBIS, so they don't bother so much with the lenses, but that's not really the main difference for me. Whether Leica or Lumix branded, the Panasonic lenses definitely seem to shift greener in the color wheel than Olympus, and don't seem to give as pleasing skin tones. Of course, I live in Australia where most photos are taken in bright sunshine with light reflected upwards from our verdant and water-hungry reticulated lawns, but there always seems to be a slight green cast, and I notice it here too. I find myself putting a bit more blue and magenta in my post-processing than I do with Olympus OM lenses, and that's shooting them on an Olympus body. When doubling down on the Panasonic color palette, like with my GF1 or my now dead GX7, there was a pea soupy quality to the colors, and even here there's a hint. Look, I could be making that up, but you tell me. And while you're typing your comments, don't forget to like and subscribe, because whatever decision I make about my next move in travel photography, I'm going to use every cent of that ad revenue to find the perfect solution to my needs for a 2025 travel kit. I mean, as much as I love the Pen F, the reality is that they're not likely to bring out another one in the near future. Of course, this isn't my only Micro Four Thirds camera. I do have this one too, the Olympus OM10 Mark II. Technically, my wife's camera is pretty much a stripped-down version of the Pen, and seeing as that's what OM Systems seems to be doing with their OM5 these days, I thought I'd give it a chance in my own hands. She seems to do well with it and likes it, though these days prying the Pentax 17 out of her hands is the biggest photographic challenge in our household. She was happy enough for me to take it with me to Sri Lanka, and I got a chance to try out the Leica 25mm on a stopover on my way back in Singapore's Chinatown. This time I did turn off the image stabilization on the GoPro. I could argue that I did it deliberately to enhance the nervous excitement of the Singapore streets, but that's a pretty poor excuse for my videography, particularly because the streets weren't even that frenetic. I don't know what it is about Singapore. It's like they've taken the excitement of Malay, Chinese and Indian culture and run it through an autoclave to give it a perfectly sterile facsimile of an Asian city. Not that the interesting culture isn't there, you just have to dig deeply to find it, whereas I just grazed the pavements of Chinatown. And with Micro Four Thirds, that graze through the Singapore evening comes with a bucket load of gravel rash in the form of digital noise. And if we're going to address what's probably the biggest criticism of Micro Four Thirds, then it's image quality, more specifically sensor quality, because really those criticisms just relate to the small size and poor light gathering capabilities of that tiny chip inside it. And you know, it's a reasonable concern, and I've spent many hours comparing sensor resolution and noise on dpreview.com over the last couple of decades. Well, now we have the magic of artificial intelligence to make up for my lack of genuine intelligence. And AI noise reduction does a pretty good job on those grainy images. Yes, it takes as much as it gives, and you often end up with a slightly oily look to the final photo, but you can always add a bit of fake grain. I didn't do it here, but it's probably not a bad idea for the 25mm. If I had to characterize this lens, I'd say it gives an image that's got a bit of a syrupy character, in both a good and a bad way. It's sharp enough without being clinical, and while the corners aren't fantastic wide open, the lens sharpens up as you stop it down to around 5.6. Bokeh is subjective, but I like how this one renders the out of focus areas. It's never jittery, and while some reviews complain about a soap bubble quality to the bokeh balls, well, really that just adds a bit of character, and I've never found it distracting. The close-up quality wide open isn't fantastic, and it suffers a bit from chromatic aberration at f1.42, so stop it down a bit if you're taking photographs of backlit foliage or anything around the minimum focus distance of 0.3 meters. You do get a few starbursts when you stop the lens down too, but they're not so exciting that you'd ever make a feature of that. But you tell me, were you really looking at those photos and thinking about the inadequacy of the camera or the lens? The inadequacies of the photographer, sure, and it is true that using weaker and older technologies does sometimes require a bit more creativity. But let's bear in mind that for the pictures of Singapore, I was using this tiny little EM10 Mark II. And while I did find the touchscreen and autofocus a tiny bit less responsive and more sluggish on the EM10 compared to the Pen F, it did not stop me getting the photos I needed. In fact, I didn't even include all of them here, simply because this video is already too long, and it would have been even longer if I featured every photo that came out of these couple of walks through Malaysia and Singapore. Let's not forget too that there are some inherent advantages to Micro Four Thirds when out on the street. You can still get the same subject separation as you'd get from full frame. You just need to use a bright long lens like the 75mm f1.8. But by default, the greater depth of field of the format is perfect for street photography. You also get better image stabilization and the potential to handhold long telephoto lenses, all in a form factor that won't get your head kicked in when you're out on the streets at night. Adding to that, the newer models like the OM3 are bringing unmatched computational features as well as snappy autofocus, and Micro Four Thirds does remain a valid option. To prove the point, let's find 6 of the best of the M43 bunch, and as is usually the case when I shoot digital, I have too many to choose from. I actually started with 12, but then applied the same reductive discipline that Micro Four Thirds sensor requires and applied a 50% crop factor. It wasn't easy. These make a natural pigeon pair, but are just too similar, so I had to settle on one of them. Actually, this process of having to curate my own work, as well as being effectively a public self-evisceration, is actually quite useful. I can see certain patterns in subject matter, lighting, composition all starting to emerge. I can't deny my tendency for front-on framing, my positioning of people as elements in the scene, and seeming need to capture those awkward human gestures, poses, and interactions. I'm too racked with confusion when I'm out on the streets to call them decisive moments, but with this one as an example, it's clear that I've caught the beginnings of either a sneeze or an Adolf Hitler impersonation that regardless acted as a nice corollary to the diner and the rapacious crab claws. That's definitely one of the picks, and let's quietly parade the others too, like a formation of World War II veterans shuffling at the back of the Remembrance Day March. So, is Micro Four Thirds all you need? Absolutely. Is it all you want? Well, I'm lucky enough to have a full-frame camera too, as well as a range of film cameras, so really I should be completely satisfied with what I have. But I do have to admit that OM3 still looks nice. Yeah, I'll probably still upgrade. Later.